Life has a way of testing us when we least expect it. One moment, everything seems to be going according to plan. And the next moment, you find yourself standing in the wreckage of what you thought was your stable, predictable existence. The job you counted on disappears overnight. The relationship you invested years in crumbles before your eyes. The health scare that changes everything in a single doctor's visit. The financial security that evaporates in ways you never imagined possible. In these moments, when the ground beneath your feet feels like it's giving way, when the future you planned seems to dissolve into uncertainty, there is one skill that separates those who thrive from those who merely survive. That skill is the ability to remain calm in the center of the storm. Not the kind of superficial calm that comes from denial or distraction, but the deep, unshakable calm that comes from understanding something profound about the nature of life itself. Most people believe that calmness is the absence of chaos, but this is a fundamental misunderstanding. True calmness is not about avoiding life's storms. It's about learning to stand steady while the winds howl around you. It's about discovering that within you lies a source of peace that no external circumstance can touch. Today, we're going to explore how to access that inner sanctuary, how to build the kind of mental and emotional resilience that allows you to not just survive life's inevitable challenges, but to emerge from them stronger, wiser, and more capable than before. Chapter 1. The Illusion of Control. The first step toward unshakable calmness begins with understanding one of the most liberating truths you will ever encounter. Most of the anxiety, panic, and overwhelm you experience when life falls apart comes from fighting against something that was never yours to control in the first place. You see, human beings are wired to believe they have far more control over their circumstances than they actually do. This illusion of control is both a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing because it motivates you to take action, to work toward your goals, to believe that your efforts matter. But it becomes a curse when you extend that sense of control to areas of life that exist completely outside your influence. The economy, other people's decisions, natural disasters, accidents, illness, death. These forces operate according to their own laws, completely indifferent to your plans, your needs, or your timeline. When you base your sense of security on controlling things you cannot control, you set yourself up for a kind of suffering that is entirely optional. You create resistance against reality itself. And resistance against reality is the source of almost all emotional pain. Think about it. When something unexpected happens, your immediate response is often to fight against it mentally. You tell yourself this shouldn't be happening. You rage against the unfairness of it all. You exhaust yourself, trying to force circumstances back into the shape you prefer. But here's what the calmest people in the world understand that others don't. They've learned to distinguish between what they can influence and what they cannot. They've trained themselves to pour their energy exclusively into their circle of influence while accepting everything outside that circle with a kind of peaceful surrender. This doesn't make them passive or resigned. It makes them incredibly powerful because they're not wasting their limited energy fighting battles they cannot win. The ancient Stoic philosophers had a profound understanding of this principle. They taught that we suffer not from events themselves, but from our judgments about events. When you can separate what happens to you from what you think about what happens to you, you discover a space of freedom that no external circumstance can touch. In that space, you find the eye of the hurricane, perfect stillness in the center of chaos. Consider how this applies to every area of your life. You cannot control whether you get laid off, but you can control how you respond to unemployment. You cannot control whether someone leaves you, but you can control how you process that loss and what you choose to do next. You cannot control whether you face a health crisis, but you can control your attitude toward healing and your commitment to whatever treatment is available. This shift in perspective is not about becoming passive or accepting defeat. It's about becoming strategic with your emotional and mental energy. When you stop trying to control the uncontrollable, you free up enormous amounts of energy that you can redirect toward the things you actually can influence. Your thoughts, your actions, your responses, your decisions about what to do next. The people who remain calm during crisis have internalized this wisdom so deeply that it becomes automatic. When something unexpected happens, they don't waste time asking why this is happening to them. They don't spend energy wishing things were different. Instead, they immediately shift their attention to what they can do about it. This mental habit alone will transform your relationship with uncertainty and change. But understanding this intellectually is not enough. You must practice it. Start with small inconveniences. When you're stuck in traffic, instead of raging against the delay, practice accepting it completely while focusing on what you can control in that moment. Maybe you use the time to listen to something educational. Maybe you practice deep breathing. Maybe you simply observe your surroundings with curiosity instead of frustration. When you face a larger crisis, the same principle applies on a bigger scale. Accept the reality of what has happened completely, without resistance, without the mental commentary that tells you it shouldn't be this way. Then, from that place of acceptance, ask yourself what you can do about it. What actions are available to you right now? What resources do you have that you haven't considered? What opportunities might be hidden within this apparent disaster? This is the foundation of unshakable calm. Not the absence of problems, but the presence of wisdom about where to direct your attention when problems arise. Chapter 2. The temporary nature of all things. One of the most powerful tools for maintaining calmness during difficult times is developing a deep understanding of impermanence. Everything in life is temporary. Your current crisis, no matter how overwhelming it feels right now, is temporary. Your pain, your confusion, your sense of being lost or broken, all of it is temporary. But here's the paradox that most people miss. While your problems are temporary, the strength you build by facing them becomes permanent. Most people resist change because they confuse temporary circumstances with permanent identity. When you lose your job, you might think, "I am unemployed," as if unemployment is a permanent state of being rather than a temporary situation. When a relationship ends, you might think, "I am alone," as if being alone is your fixed destiny rather than your current circumstance. When you face financial difficulty, you might think, "I am poor," as if your current financial situation defines your worth or your future possibilities. This mental trap keeps you stuck because you begin to build your identity around temporary circumstances. You start to believe that what you're experiencing now is what you will always experience. But this is never true. Life is in constant motion. Nothing stays the same forever. The question is whether you will resist this natural flow or learn to move with it. The calmest people in the world have learned to hold their circumstances lightly. They understand that everything they are experiencing right now, both the good and the bad, is part of a larger pattern that is constantly shifting and changing. This doesn't make them detached or uncaring. It makes them resilient because they don't mistake temporary experiences for permanent realities. Think about your own life for a moment. How many times have you faced something that felt overwhelming at the time, only to look back later and realize it was actually a turning point that led to something better? How many times have you worried about something that never actually happened, or happened but turned out to be less significant than you imagined? How many times have you discovered that what initially seemed like a disaster actually opened doors you didn't even know existed? This is not about pretending that your current pain doesn't matter or that you should just wait passively for things to get better. It's about maintaining perspective while you take action. It's about remembering that your current situation is one chapter in a much larger story, not the entire book. When you can see your current crisis as temporary, you can make decisions from a place of wisdom rather than panic. Panic makes terrible decisions because panic assumes that what's happening right now will continue forever. Panic doesn't consider other possibilities. Panic doesn't look for creative solutions. Panic just reacts to what appears to be true right now without considering the bigger picture. But when you remember that everything is temporary, you can think strategically about how to navigate your current situation in a way that sets you up for long-term success. This understanding also helps you appreciate the good times more fully when they come. If you truly understand that everything is temporary, you don't take positive experiences for granted. You savor them without clinging to them. You enjoy them fully while they're here, without demanding that they last forever. This creates a kind of lightness and gratitude that actually attracts more positive experiences into your life. The Buddhist concept of impermanence teaches that suffering comes from attachment to things that are naturally changing. When you try to hold on to something that is meant to be temporary, you create resistance against the natural flow of life. But when you learn to appreciate things fully while holding them lightly, you can enjoy life's gifts without being destroyed when they change form. Practice observing the temporary nature of everything in your daily life. Notice how your emotions shift throughout the day. Observe how your energy levels rise and fall. Watch how your thoughts change from moment to moment. Pay attention to how the weather changes, how the seasons cycle, how even your physical body is constantly changing and renewing itself. This practice will help you develop what psychologists call emotional flexibility, the ability to experience intense emotions without being overwhelmed by them, because you know they will pass. When you're facing a major crisis, this flexibility becomes invaluable. You can feel the fear, the sadness, the anger, or the confusion fully without believing that these emotions are permanent states of being. Remember, the storm will pass. It always does. But the person you become by learning to stand calm in the center of the storm, that person remains with you forever. Every crisis you navigate successfully makes you more capable of handling future challenges with grace and wisdom. Chapter 3. Building your inner sanctuary. In the midst of external chaos, the most important thing you can do is cultivate an inner space that remains untouched by circumstances. This is not about denial or escapism. This is about developing access to a part of yourself that exists beyond the reach of external events. Think of it as building an inner sanctuary, a place of peace and clarity that you can access regardless of what's happening around you. Most people look for peace in their external circumstances. They believe they will feel calm when their problems are solved, when their relationships are stable, when their finances are secure, when their health is perfect. But this approach to peace is inherently fragile because external circumstances are always changing. The peace that depends on circumstances is not really peace at all. It's just temporary relief that can be shattered at any moment. True peace, the kind that remains steady during crisis, comes from within. It comes from developing a relationship with the part of yourself that observes your thoughts and emotions without being controlled by them. This is sometimes called the witness self or the observer self. It's the part of you that can watch your own mind without being swept away by its stories and reactions. Building this inner sanctuary requires practice, but it's simpler than most people imagine. It begins with learning to step back from your immediate reactions and observe them with curiosity rather than judgment. When something stressful happens, instead of being completely consumed by your emotional response, you can learn to take a mental step back and notice what you're experiencing. You might notice that your heart is racing, that your breathing is shallow, that your mind is spinning with worst-case scenarios. Instead of fighting these responses or judging yourself for having them, you simply observe them the way you might observe clouds moving across the sky. They're there. They're real, but they don't define the sky itself. Your thoughts and emotions are real, but they don't define the essential you. This practice creates space between you and your reactions. In that space, you discover freedom. In that space, you can choose how to respond rather than simply reacting automatically. In that space, you find calmness, even in the midst of intense circumstances, because you're not completely identified with your temporary emotional states. The development of this inner sanctuary is closely related to what many spiritual traditions call presence or mindfulness. It's the ability to be fully here, in this moment, aware of what you're experiencing without being overwhelmed by it. When you're truly present, you're not lost in anxious thoughts about the future or regretful thoughts about the past. You're anchored in the now, where you actually have power to take action. This might sound abstract, but it has very practical applications when you're dealing with crisis. When your mind is spinning with worry about everything that could go wrong, presence brings you back to what's actually happening right now and what you can do about it right now. When you're overwhelmed by the magnitude of your problems, presence helps you focus on the next single step rather than trying to solve everything at once. Building your inner sanctuary also involves developing what could be called emotional independence. This doesn't mean becoming cold or detached from others. It means not making your inner peace completely dependent on other people's approval, behavior, or decisions. When your sense of calm depends entirely on how others treat you or what they think of you, you've given away your power to circumstances you cannot control. Emotional independence means you can remain centered even when others are upset, angry, or disappointed in you. It means you can make decisions based on your own values and wisdom rather than being swayed by every opinion or criticism. It means you can offer love and support to others without losing yourself in their problems or making their problems your identity. This inner sanctuary becomes your refuge during storms, when everything around you is chaotic, when people are panicking, when the future is uncertain. You have a place within yourself where you can find stillness and clarity. From that place, you can think clearly, make wise decisions, and take effective action. You become a source of calm for others as well, because your peace is not dependent on external circumstances. The practice of building this sanctuary is ongoing. Every time you choose awareness over reaction, every time you choose presence over anxiety, every time you choose inner wisdom over external pressure, you strengthen this inner refuge. It's like building a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it becomes. Start with small moments throughout your day. Take conscious breaths. Notice when you're fully present versus when your mind is scattered. Practice observing your thoughts without believing all of them. Create small rituals that help you reconnect with your inner calm. Maybe it's a few minutes of silence in the morning. Maybe it's a walk in nature. Maybe it's simply pausing before you react to challenging situations. Remember, this inner sanctuary is always available to you. It's not something you have to create from scratch. It's something you have to remember and access. Beneath all the noise of your thoughts, beneath all the intensity of your emotions, beneath all the chaos of your circumstances, there is a part of you that is inherently peaceful, inherently wise, inherently calm. Your job is not to create this calm. Your job is to remove the obstacles that prevent you from experiencing it. Chapter 4. The Power of Radical Acceptance. Perhaps the most misunderstood concept in dealing with crisis is acceptance. Most people believe that accepting a difficult situation means giving up, becoming passive, or approving of circumstances they don't like. But this is not what acceptance means at all. Radical acceptance is actually one of the most powerful tools available to you when life falls apart, because it frees up the enormous amount of energy you've been using to resist reality. Think about what happens in your mind when something goes wrong. Your immediate response is usually some version of, "This shouldn't be happening." You spend mental and emotional energy fighting against what has already occurred. You replay scenarios about how things should have gone differently. You exhaust yourself, wishing the situation was other than it is. All of this mental resistance accomplishes absolutely nothing except to increase your suffering. Radical acceptance means fully acknowledging what is actually happening right now without wasting energy on wishes that it were different. It doesn't mean you have to like what's happening. It doesn't mean you won't work to change what you can change. It simply means you stop fighting against the reality of what has already occurred, so that you can direct your energy toward dealing with it effectively. This distinction is crucial. There is a massive difference between accepting what has happened and accepting that nothing can be done about it. Acceptance of what has happened is the starting point for effective action. Resistance to what has happened is the starting point for ineffective reaction. When you're busy fighting against reality, you're not available to respond to reality wisely. Consider the difference between these two internal responses to losing a job. The resistant response sounds like this: "This is so unfair. They had no right to let me go. This shouldn't be happening to me right now. I can't handle this. My life is ruined. This is a disaster." The accepting response sounds like this: "I have lost my job. This is what has happened. It's not what I wanted, but it is the current reality. Given that this is now the situation, what are my options? What can I do about it?" Can you feel the difference in energy between these two responses? The first one keeps you trapped in a cycle of resistance and victimization. The second one frees you to take productive action. The first one focuses on what you cannot change. The second one focuses on what you can influence from this point forward. Radical acceptance also applies to accepting your own emotional responses to crisis. When something traumatic or difficult happens, you will have emotional reactions. You might feel scared, angry, sad, confused, or overwhelmed. Instead of judging these emotions as signs of weakness or trying to suppress them, radical acceptance means acknowledging them as natural responses to difficult circumstances. When you accept your emotions without judgment, something interesting happens. They move through you more quickly and cleanly. Emotions that are fully felt and accepted tend to resolve naturally. Emotions that are resisted, judged, or suppressed tend to get stuck and create ongoing psychological tension. By accepting your emotional responses as normal and temporary, you allow them to serve their natural function and then move on. This doesn't mean wallowing in negative emotions or using them as excuses for poor behavior. It means feeling them fully, learning from them if there's something to learn, and then taking appropriate action despite their presence. You can feel afraid and still take brave action. You can feel sad and still make wise decisions. You can feel angry and still respond with integrity. Radical acceptance extends to accepting uncertainty as well. One of the most difficult aspects of crisis is not knowing what's going to happen next. The human mind craves certainty and predictability. So when the future becomes unclear, anxiety naturally arises. But fighting against uncertainty is like fighting against the weather. It's a fundamental characteristic of existence that cannot be eliminated no matter how much you resist it. Instead of exhausting yourself trying to eliminate uncertainty, you can learn to become comfortable with not knowing. You can develop what some people call uncertainty tolerance, the ability to move forward and make decisions even when you don't have all the information you would prefer to have. This skill is invaluable during crisis because crisis situations are inherently uncertain. Practicing radical acceptance also means accepting other people exactly as they are, especially during times when you might need their help or support. This doesn't mean approving of harmful behavior or failing to set appropriate boundaries. It means recognizing that other people will respond to crisis in their own way, according to their own capacity and understanding, and that you cannot control their responses. When you stop trying to make other people react to crisis the way you think they should react, you free yourself from a tremendous amount of frustration and disappointment. You can ask for what you need, communicate clearly about your situation, and make decisions based on what people are actually able and willing to offer, rather than what you wish they would offer. The practice of radical acceptance becomes easier when you understand that acceptance and action are not opposites. In fact, acceptance is often the prerequisite for effective action. When you fully accept what has happened, you can see your situation clearly without the distortion that comes from resistance. Clear seeing leads to wise action. Resistant seeing leads to reactive behavior that often makes situations worse. Start practicing radical acceptance with small daily annoyances. When you're stuck in traffic, practice accepting it completely instead of fighting against it mentally. When someone disappoints you, practice accepting their behavior without immediately trying to change them or judge them. When you make a mistake, practice accepting it as something that has already happened, instead of beating yourself up about it. This practice will build your capacity for radical acceptance during larger crises. You'll discover that acceptance doesn't make you passive or weak. It makes you incredibly powerful because you're working with reality instead of against it. Chapter 5. Emotional regulation in crisis. When life falls apart, your emotional system naturally goes into overdrive. This is not a sign of weakness or failure. It's a normal human response to threat and uncertainty. However, being overwhelmed by your emotions during crisis makes it much more difficult to think clearly, make good decisions, and take effective action. Learning to regulate your emotions during difficult times is one of the most practical and important skills you can develop. Emotional regulation doesn't mean suppressing your emotions or pretending to feel differently than you actually feel. It means developing the ability to experience intense emotions without being completely controlled by them. It means creating enough space between you and your emotional reactions that you can choose how to respond, rather than simply reacting automatically. The first step in emotional regulation is understanding what emotions actually are. Emotions are information. They tell you something about your situation and your needs. Fear tells you that you perceive a threat and need to take protective action. Anger tells you that you perceive an injustice and might need to set boundaries or stand up for yourself. Sadness tells you that you have lost something important and might need time to grieve and process. The problem arises when you either ignore this information completely or become so overwhelmed by it that you cannot think clearly about how to respond. Both extremes are problematic. Ignoring emotions leads to poor decision-making because you're missing important information about your situation. Being overwhelmed by emotions also leads to poor decision-making because you're reacting from a state of panic rather than wisdom. Healthy emotional regulation involves feeling your emotions fully, listening to the information they provide, and then making conscious choices about how to respond. This process requires slowing down the automatic cycle between feeling and reacting. In that slowed down space, you can process what you're experiencing and decide what to do about it. One of the most effective techniques for emotional regulation during crisis is something called the stop method. When you notice yourself becoming overwhelmed by emotions, you stop what you're doing. Take a deep breath. Observe what you're feeling without judgment, and then proceed with conscious awareness rather than automatic reaction. The stop phase is crucial because it interrupts the momentum of emotional overwhelm. Instead of being swept away by intense feelings, you create a pause that gives you access to your higher thinking abilities. The breathing phase activates your parasympathetic nervous system, which naturally calms your body's stress response. The observing phase helps you gain perspective on what you're experiencing. The proceeding phase ensures that your next actions are chosen rather than automatic. Another powerful technique is called emotional labeling. When you're experiencing intense emotions during crisis, take a moment to identify and name what you're feeling as specifically as possible. Instead of just saying, "I feel terrible," try to identify the specific emotions present. Are you feeling scared about the future? Angry about unfair treatment? Sad about what you've lost? Overwhelmed by too many demands? Lonely because you feel unsupported? This labeling process activates the prefrontal cortex of your brain, which naturally reduces the intensity of emotional reactions. It also helps you understand what your emotions are trying to tell you, which makes it easier to respond appropriately. If you're feeling scared, you might need to focus on creating safety or getting support. If you're feeling angry, you might need to address an injustice or set clearer boundaries. Physical techniques for emotional regulation are also extremely important during crisis. Your body and mind are intimately connected, so caring for your physical state directly affects your emotional state. Deep, slow breathing is one of the fastest ways to calm your nervous system when you're feeling overwhelmed. Progressive muscle relaxation can help release physical tension that accumulates during stress. Regular exercise, even if it's just walking, helps metabolize stress hormones and releases mood-regulating chemicals in your brain. Adequate sleep becomes even more important during crisis because sleep deprivation dramatically reduces your ability to regulate emotions effectively. Proper nutrition supports stable blood sugar levels, which affects your mood and emotional stability throughout the day. It's also important to understand the difference between primary emotions and secondary emotions during crisis. Primary emotions are your immediate, natural responses to situations. Secondary emotions are your reactions to your primary emotions. For example, you might feel afraid about losing your job, which is a primary emotion. Then you might feel ashamed about feeling afraid, which is a secondary emotion. Secondary emotions often cause more suffering than primary emotions because they involve judging your natural responses as wrong or inappropriate. During crisis, it's particularly important to practice self-compassion about your emotional reactions. You're dealing with difficult circumstances, and it's normal to have intense emotional responses. Judging yourself for having these responses only adds unnecessary suffering to an already challenging situation. Creating a crisis emotional regulation plan before you need it can be incredibly helpful. Identify the techniques that work best for you when you're feeling overwhelmed. Maybe it's calling a supportive friend, taking a hot bath, going for a walk, practicing deep breathing, or writing in a journal. Having a clear plan removes the decision-making burden when you're already stressed and makes it more likely that you'll use effective coping strategies. Remember that emotional regulation during crisis is a skill that improves with practice. Don't expect to master it immediately, especially when you're dealing with intense situations. Be patient with yourself as you learn. Each time you practice creating space between your emotions and your reactions, you build your capacity for emotional resilience. The goal is not to eliminate difficult emotions during crisis. The goal is to experience them without being completely overwhelmed by them, to learn from the information they provide, and to respond from a place of wisdom rather than pure reaction. This ability will serve you not only during major crises, but in all the smaller challenges and stresses of daily life. Chapter 6. Reframing crisis as opportunity. One of the most transformative shifts you can make when life falls apart is learning to see crisis not as pure destruction, but as a powerful catalyst for growth and change. This doesn't mean pretending that difficult situations are enjoyable or denying the real pain and loss that crisis can bring. It means developing the ability to recognize the hidden opportunities that exist within every breakdown. Most people view crisis as something that happens to them, something external that disrupts their plans and destroys their security. But what if crisis is actually something that happens for them? What if the very circumstances that seem to be tearing your life apart are actually clearing space for something better to emerge? This perspective shift doesn't happen automatically. It requires conscious practice and a willingness to look beyond the immediate pain, to see larger patterns and possibilities. Consider how many of the most successful people in any field have stories of crisis that became turning points. The job loss that led to starting their own business, the health scare that caused them to completely redesign their lifestyle and priorities, the relationship ending that freed them to discover who they really were outside of that dynamic, the financial disaster that taught them skills and resilience they never would have developed otherwise. This is not about romanticizing suffering or suggesting that all pain leads to positive outcomes. Sometimes, crisis is simply crisis, and the main task is to survive and heal from it. But more often than most people realize, what appears to be a disaster contains within it the seeds of breakthrough, innovation, and transformation. The question is whether you have the vision to recognize these possibilities and the courage to act on them. Crisis has a unique way of stripping away everything that isn't essential. When your normal routines and securities are disrupted, you're forced to examine what actually matters to you. Many people discover during crisis that they were spending enormous amounts of energy maintaining things that didn't truly serve their deepest values or long-term happiness. The job that provided security but drained their soul. The relationship that looked good on the surface but prevented authentic intimacy. The lifestyle that impressed others but left them feeling empty. When these structures collapse, the initial experience is usually terror and grief. You feel like you're losing everything. But as you learn to navigate the uncertainty, you often discover that what you're actually losing are the barriers that were preventing you from accessing your true potential. Crisis can be a harsh but effective teacher that shows you where you've been settling for less than you deserve or avoiding challenges that would help you grow. The process of reframing crisis requires developing what psychologists call post-traumatic growth. This is the recognition that traumatic or highly challenging experiences can actually result in positive psychological changes. People who experience post-traumatic growth often report increased appreciation for life, deeper relationships with others, greater awareness of their own strength and resilience, and a clearer sense of their priorities and values. This growth doesn't happen despite the crisis. It happens because of the crisis. The disruption forces you out of your comfort zone and demands that you develop new skills, discover hidden resources, and question assumptions that may have been limiting you. The very process of surviving something you didn't think you could survive teaches you that you're more capable than you previously believed. Learning to reframe crisis also involves looking for what wants to emerge from the breakdown. Often, crisis occurs when some aspect of your life has outgrown its current form and needs to evolve. the career that no longer fits who you've become, the living situation that no longer supports your growth, the identity that no longer reflects your authentic self. Crisis can be life's way of pushing you toward changes you needed to make, but were too comfortable or afraid to initiate on your own. This doesn't mean you should seek out crisis or be grateful for traumatic experiences. It means that when crisis does occur, as it inevitably will, you can look for the growth opportunities hidden within it. You can ask yourself what this experience is teaching you about your strengths, your values, your relationships, and your priorities. You can explore what new possibilities are becoming available now that old structures have been cleared away. The practice of reframing requires patience because the opportunities within crisis are rarely obvious in the beginning. When you're in the acute phase of dealing with a major life disruption, survival is the primary concern. The growth and opportunity usually become visible only as you move through the experience and begin to integrate what you've learned. Start by looking for small examples in your own life where something that initially seemed negative eventually led to positive changes. Maybe a rejection that led you to a better opportunity. Maybe a failure that taught you important lessons. Maybe a loss that helped you appreciate what you still had. Building awareness of these patterns in your past helps you maintain hope and perspective when facing current challenges. You can also practice reframing smaller daily disruptions as opportunities to build resilience and flexibility. When plans change unexpectedly, instead of seeing it only as an inconvenience, you can see it as practice for handling uncertainty. When someone disappoints you, instead of seeing it only as betrayal, you can see it as information about boundaries you need to set or independence you need to develop. Remember, reframing crisis as opportunity doesn't require you to feel grateful for painful experiences or to pretend they're not difficult. It simply means remaining open to the possibility that even the most challenging circumstances can become catalysts for positive change. This openness itself becomes a source of resilience because it helps you maintain hope and agency, even when external circumstances seem hopeless. Chapter 7. The strength found in vulnerability. There's a common misconception that staying calm during crisis means being strong in the traditional sense. People often believe they need to be stoic, independent, and emotionally controlled to navigate difficult times effectively. But this understanding of strength is not only incomplete, it's often counterproductive. True resilience during crisis comes from embracing what might seem like the opposite of strength: vulnerability. Vulnerability in crisis doesn't mean falling apart or being unable to function. It means being honest about what you're experiencing, admitting when you need help, and allowing yourself to feel the full range of human emotions that arise during difficult times. This kind of openness actually requires tremendous courage because it goes against everything most people have been taught about how to handle adversity. Most people learn early in life that showing weakness or need is dangerous. They develop protective strategies designed to make them appear strong and self-sufficient, even when they're struggling. But these strategies, while sometimes necessary for survival, often prevent access to the very resources that could help them navigate crisis more effectively. When you pretend to have everything under control, you cut yourself off from support. When you refuse to admit that you're struggling, you prevent others from offering help. When you hide your fears and uncertainties, you miss opportunities to connect with people who might have faced similar challenges and learned valuable lessons you could benefit from. True strength during crisis includes the ability to say, "I don't know what I'm doing. I'm scared about what happens next," or "I need help figuring this out." These statements don't make you weak. They make you human. And recognizing your humanity during times of crisis is often the first step toward finding resources and solutions you couldn't access while trying to maintain a facade of invulnerability. Vulnerability also allows you to process the emotional impact of crisis more completely. When you're focused on appearing strong, you often suppress or minimize your emotional responses to traumatic or difficult experiences. But emotions that aren't fully processed don't disappear. They get stored in your body and psyche, where they can create ongoing tension, anxiety, and physical health problems. Allowing yourself to feel vulnerable during crisis creates space for natural healing processes to occur. Tears help release stress hormones and provide emotional relief. Talking about your fears and concerns helps you process them cognitively and often leads to new insights or solutions. Accepting comfort and support from others helps regulate your nervous system and reminds you that you're not alone in your struggles. The practice of vulnerable strength also involves being honest about your limitations during crisis. Instead of trying to handle everything yourself, you can acknowledge what you're genuinely capable of managing and what areas require additional support or resources. This honest assessment allows you to allocate your energy more effectively and prevents the burnout that comes from trying to do more than is humanly possible. Many people discover during crisis that their relationships become deeper and more meaningful when they allow themselves to be vulnerable. Sharing your struggles with trusted people creates opportunities for genuine intimacy and connection that wouldn't be possible if you always maintained a strong, independent facade. People often want to help, but don't know how to offer support to someone who appears to have everything together. Vulnerability during crisis also includes being open about not having all the answers. One of the most stressful aspects of major life disruptions is the pressure to know what to do next, to have a clear plan, to be certain about decisions that will affect your future. But crisis, by definition, involves entering unknown territory where your previous strategies and knowledge may not apply. Admitting that you don't know what to do next is not failure. It's honesty. And from that honest place, you can begin to explore options, gather information, seek advice, and experiment with different approaches. When you're pretending to know what you're doing, you're less likely to remain open to new information or alternative solutions that might be more effective than your original plans. The vulnerability required during crisis extends to your relationship with uncertainty itself. Instead of fighting against not knowing what will happen, you can learn to become comfortable with uncertainty as a natural part of the human experience. This doesn't mean you won't work toward creating more security and predictability in your life. It means you won't exhaust yourself fighting against the reality that some things will always be unknown. Practicing vulnerability in smaller ways prepares you for the larger vulnerabilities that crisis demands. You can start by admitting when you don't understand something, asking for help with minor challenges, or sharing your concerns with trusted friends. Each time you practice being vulnerable and discover that the world doesn't end, you build confidence in your ability to be open during more challenging times. You can also practice self-compassion as a form of vulnerability. Instead of being harsh and critical with yourself when you make mistakes or struggle with difficult situations, you can treat yourself with the same kindness you would show a good friend facing similar challenges. This internal vulnerability, being gentle with your own human limitations and imperfections, creates a foundation of self-support that remains available even when external support is limited. Remember that vulnerability is not the same as helplessness. Vulnerable strength means being open about what you're experiencing, while still taking appropriate action to address your situation. It means feeling your fears while still moving forward with courage. It means admitting your limitations while still using whatever resources and capabilities you do have available. Chapter 8. Creating stability in unstable times. When external circumstances are chaotic and unpredictable, one of the most important things you can do is create islands of stability in your daily life. These stable elements serve as anchors that keep you grounded when everything else feels like it's shifting beneath your feet. The key is understanding that stability doesn't have to come from having all your problems solved. It can come from maintaining consistent practices and routines that provide structure and meaning regardless of what's happening around you. Many people make the mistake of abandoning their normal routines and self-care practices during crisis, thinking they don't have time for such things when their world is falling apart. But this is exactly backwards. During stable times, you can afford to be inconsistent with your daily practices because your external circumstances provide structure and predictability. During unstable times, your internal practices become even more crucial because they may be the only source of consistency available to you. Think of these stable practices as your personal life preservers during storms. A morning routine that includes activities that center and ground you. An evening routine that helps you process the day and prepare for rest. Regular exercise that helps regulate your nervous system and maintain physical health. Consistent sleep and meal times that support your body's natural rhythms. Time for reflection, prayer, meditation, or whatever spiritual practice helps you maintain perspective. These practices don't have to be elaborate or time-consuming to be effective. Even 10 minutes of morning meditation, a brief walk at lunch, or 15 minutes of journaling before bed can provide significant stability during chaotic times. The key is consistency, not perfection. It's better to do something small every day than to do something elaborate occasionally. Creating stability also means establishing clear boundaries between what you can control and what you cannot control in your daily life. During crisis, it's easy to become consumed by monitoring news, social media, or other sources of information about your situation. While staying informed is important, constantly absorbing information about things you cannot directly influence often increases anxiety without providing any practical benefit. Set specific times for checking updates about your situation and limit your exposure to sources that increase your stress without providing actionable information. Create media-free zones in your day where you focus on activities that are within your direct control. This might mean no news or social media for the first hour after waking up, or avoiding anxiety-inducing content before bedtime. Physical spaces can also provide stability during unstable times. Even if your living situation has changed or your financial circumstances have shifted, you can create small areas of order and beauty that provide comfort and peace. This might be as simple as keeping your bedroom neat and adding a few items that bring you joy, or creating a small corner where you can sit quietly and reflect. Your physical environment affects your mental state more than most people realize. When external chaos is high, having at least one space that feels calm and ordered can provide psychological relief. It doesn't have to be perfect or expensive. It just needs to feel like a refuge from the storm. Building stability during unstable times also involves maintaining connections with people who provide consistent support and understanding. Crisis can be isolating, especially if your situation is unusual or difficult for others to understand. But even during the most challenging times, there are usually people who care about your well-being and want to offer support. Make consistent effort to stay connected with these supportive relationships, even if it's just brief check-ins or simple messages letting people know how you're doing. These connections remind you that you're not alone and provide sources of encouragement when your own inner resources feel depleted. Financial stability becomes particularly important during crisis, and this is an area where small, consistent actions can make a significant difference over time. Even if your income has been reduced or eliminated, maintaining whatever financial practices you can helps provide a sense of agency and forward movement. This might mean tracking your expenses carefully, looking for small ways to reduce costs, or setting aside even tiny amounts of money when possible. The psychological benefit of maintaining some financial discipline during crisis extends beyond the practical advantages. It provides a sense that you're taking care of your future self, that you haven't given up on recovery and growth. These small acts of financial responsibility can help maintain hope and self-respect during times when both may be in short supply. Creating intellectual and creative stability is also important during unstable times. Continue reading, learning, or engaging in creative activities that feed your mind and spirit. These activities provide continuity with who you are beyond your current circumstances. They remind you that you're still growing and developing as a person, even while dealing with major challenges. Set small, achievable goals that are within your control and celebrate when you accomplish them. Maybe it's reading one chapter of a book each day, writing a page in a journal, or learning something new online. These accomplishments provide evidence that you're still capable of growth and achievement even during difficult times. Remember that creating stability doesn't mean eliminating all uncertainty or solving all your problems immediately. It means building a foundation of consistent practices and reliable resources that support you while you navigate uncertainty and work toward solutions. This foundation becomes the platform from which you can take effective action and make wise decisions about your future. The stability you create during crisis also prepares you for the opportunities and challenges that will emerge as your situation improves. The habits and practices you maintain during difficult times become strengths you can build upon when circumstances become more favorable. Chapter 9. The practice of present moment awareness. One of the greatest sources of suffering during crisis is the mind's tendency to either ruminate about past events or catastrophize about future possibilities. Your thoughts ping-pong between regret, blame, and analysis of how things went wrong, and anxiety, fear, and worry about all the terrible things that might happen next. Meanwhile, the present moment, which is the only place where you actually have any power to take action, gets lost in the mental noise. Developing present moment awareness during crisis is not about positive thinking or pretending that your problems don't exist. It's about training your attention to focus on what's actually happening right now, rather than getting lost in mental stories about the past or future. This focused attention is where you find both peace and power. Because the present moment is where life actually occurs and where effective action becomes possible. Most of the anxiety you experience during crisis comes from thinking about future scenarios that haven't happened yet and may never happen. Your mind creates detailed stories about how bad things might get, how much worse your situation could become, and all the additional problems that might arise. While some planning and preparation for future challenges is useful, most worry is simply mental torture that accomplishes nothing except increasing your stress. Similarly, much of the depression and anger that accompanies crisis comes from mentally replaying past events, analyzing what went wrong, blaming yourself or others for decisions and actions that can no longer be changed. While some reflection and learning from past experience is valuable, most rumination is simply mental punishment that keeps you trapped in events that are already over. Present moment awareness offers an escape from both of these mental traps. When you bring your attention fully to what's happening right now, you discover that the present moment is usually much more manageable than the stories your mind tells about the past or future. Right now, in this moment, you are breathing. You are aware. You exist. Whatever challenges you're facing, in this immediate moment, you are surviving them. This doesn't mean the present moment is always pleasant during crisis. You might be feeling fear, sadness, anger, or confusion in the present moment. But even difficult emotions are more manageable when experienced directly rather than amplified by mental stories. Fear about what's happening right now is different from fear about all the things that might happen in the future. Sadness about what you're actually experiencing right now is different from sadness about all the implications and consequences your mind has invented. The practice of present moment awareness begins with anchoring your attention in physical sensations. Your body is always in the present moment, so focusing on physical experience naturally brings your awareness into the now. This might mean paying attention to your breathing, noticing the sensation of your feet on the ground, or feeling the texture of an object in your hands. When you notice that your mind has wandered into worry about the future or regret about the past, gently bring your attention back to physical sensation. This isn't about fighting your thoughts or judging yourself for having them. It's simply about redirecting your attention to where you actually have influence and agency. Present moment awareness also involves accepting what you're experiencing right now without immediately jumping into problem-solving mode. This might seem counterintuitive during crisis, when taking action feels urgent and necessary. But the quality of your actions improves dramatically when they arise from present moment awareness rather than anxious reactivity. When you're truly present, you can perceive your situation more accurately. You're not seeing it through the lens of past disappointments or future fears. You're seeing what's actually happening right now, which gives you better information for making decisions. You can also access your intuition and inner wisdom more easily when your mind isn't scattered across time. This present-centered approach to crisis doesn't mean you won't plan for the future or learn from the past. It means you'll do these activities from a centered, aware state rather than from anxiety and reactivity. Planning that arises from present moment awareness is more creative and realistic. Learning that occurs from present moment reflection is more useful and less self-punishing. The practice of present moment awareness during crisis also helps you notice and appreciate whatever positive elements exist in your current situation. Even during the most difficult times, there are usually some aspects of your experience that are neutral or even pleasant. The taste of your morning coffee, the feeling of warm sunlight on your skin, a kind word from a friend, a moment of laughter or beauty. These positive moments aren't insignificant during crisis. They're reminders that life includes more than just your problems. They provide relief from stress and help maintain your connection to joy and appreciation. But you can only notice them when your attention is present, rather than lost in mental stories about your troubles. Building present moment awareness is a practice that develops over time. Start with short periods of bringing your attention to the present. Maybe one conscious breath at a time. Maybe 30 seconds of really noticing what you can see, hear, and feel right now. Maybe taking a few moments during routine activities like washing dishes or walking to be fully engaged with the physical experience. As your capacity for present moment awareness grows, you'll discover that it becomes a reliable refuge during emotional storms. No matter what's happening in your life, you can always return to the present moment and find some measure of peace and clarity there. This doesn't solve your external problems, but it provides the mental and emotional stability necessary for addressing them wisely. Chapter 10. Building Resilience for Future Challenges. Every crisis you navigate successfully teaches you something valuable about your own capacity for resilience. But this learning doesn't happen automatically. It requires conscious reflection on what you've discovered about yourself during difficult times and intentional cultivation of the strengths and skills that helped you survive and eventually thrive. Building resilience is not about becoming invulnerable to future challenges. It's about developing confidence in your ability to handle whatever life might bring. Resilience is often misunderstood as the ability to bounce back quickly from adversity, returning to exactly the same state you were in before the challenge occurred. But true resilience is more accurately described as the ability to adapt and grow through difficulties, emerging from challenges with new wisdom, skills, and strength that you didn't possess before. The process of building resilience begins with honestly acknowledging what has helped you get through past difficulties. Many people focus so intently on their struggles and failures that they overlook their successes and strengths. Take time to reflect on previous challenges you've faced and survived. What internal resources did you draw upon? What external supports were most helpful? What strategies proved most effective? This reflection isn't about congratulating yourself or minimizing the difficulty of what you've been through. It's about recognizing that you already have more resilience than you might realize. You've already survived every difficult day you've experienced so far. You've already demonstrated the ability to find ways forward when the path wasn't clear. This recognition itself becomes a source of strength for future challenges. Building resilience also involves identifying the specific skills and capacities that crisis has helped you develop. Maybe you've learned to ask for help more effectively. Maybe you've discovered inner strength you didn't know you possessed. Maybe you've developed better emotional regulation skills or improved your ability to tolerate uncertainty. Maybe you've learned to differentiate between what you can and cannot control. These are not just nice ideas or temporary coping mechanisms. They are actual skills that become permanent parts of your psychological toolkit. Each crisis you navigate successfully adds to this toolkit, making you more capable of handling future challenges with wisdom and effectiveness. The practice of building resilience includes developing what psychologists call stress inoculation. This means deliberately exposing yourself to manageable challenges that help you build confidence and skills in a controlled way. Just as physical exercise stresses your muscles in order to make them stronger, psychological exercise involves taking on appropriate challenges that stretch your capabilities without overwhelming you. This might mean setting goals that require you to step outside your comfort zone, taking on projects that develop new skills, or placing yourself in situations that require emotional courage. The key is choosing challenges that are difficult enough to promote growth, but not so overwhelming that they create trauma or defeat. Building resilience also requires maintaining a long-term perspective on both challenges and recovery. Crisis is often followed by a period of rebuilding that can feel slow and frustrating. It's tempting to expect quick recovery or to judge your progress harshly if rebuilding takes longer than you expected. But resilience includes understanding that meaningful recovery and growth take time. Set realistic expectations for your healing and rebuilding process. Celebrate small improvements and incremental progress. Understand that setbacks and difficult days are normal parts of recovery, not signs that you're failing or moving backwards. Resilience includes the patience to allow natural healing processes to unfold at their own pace. Developing a growth mindset is crucial for building long-term resilience. This means viewing challenges as opportunities to learn and develop, rather than as threats to your security or indicators of your inadequacy. People with growth mindsets recover from difficulties more quickly and completely because they're focused on what they can learn and how they can improve rather than on protecting their ego or avoiding future risks. This mindset shift doesn't happen overnight, especially if you've been conditioned to view problems as evidence of personal failure or inadequacy. But you can practice it consciously by asking different questions when faced with challenges. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you can ask, "What can I learn from this?" Instead of asking, "How can I avoid ever feeling this way again?" you can ask, "How can I become stronger and wiser through this experience?" Building resilience for future challenges also involves creating and maintaining supportive relationships. No one navigates life's difficulties entirely alone. And people who recover well from crisis almost always have strong social support networks. This doesn't necessarily mean having many friends or being highly social. It means having at least a few relationships with people who truly care about your well-being and who you can rely on during difficult times. Invest in these relationships before you need them. Show up for others when they're facing challenges. Be the kind of friend you would want to have during your own difficult times. Build relationships based on mutual support, honesty, and genuine care, rather than just shared activities or convenience. Creating systems and practices that support your ongoing well-being is another crucial aspect of building resilience. This includes maintaining physical health through regular exercise, adequate sleep, and proper nutrition. It includes emotional health practices like therapy, meditation, journaling, or whatever helps you process experiences and maintain psychological balance. It also includes financial health practices like maintaining emergency funds when possible, living below your means, and developing multiple sources of income or security. While you cannot prevent all future crises, you can often reduce their impact by maintaining strong foundations in these key areas of life. Remember that building resilience is an ongoing process, not a destination you reach once and then maintain forever. Each new phase of life brings different challenges that require continued growth and adaptation. The goal is not to become immune to difficulty, but to become increasingly skilled at navigating whatever difficulties arise with wisdom, courage, and grace. Chapter 11. Finding meaning in the chaos. When life falls apart, one of the most disorienting experiences is the sense that everything you're going through is meaningless, random, and pointless. The pain feels overwhelming, the losses feel senseless, and the entire experience seems like nothing more than cruel cosmic punishment or bad luck. But this perception of meaninglessness often causes more suffering than the actual circumstances themselves. Learning to find meaning in your struggles doesn't eliminate the difficulty, but it transforms your relationship with that difficulty in ways that can be profoundly healing and empowering. Meaning is not something you discover like a hidden treasure waiting to be found. Meaning is something you create through the way you choose to interpret and respond to your experiences. This is simultaneously the most challenging and the most liberating truth about human existence. You cannot control what happens to you, but you have enormous influence over what your experiences mean to you and what you choose to do with them. The search for meaning during crisis often begins with asking different questions. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" which often leads to feelings of victimization and helplessness, you can ask, "How can I grow through this experience?" Or, "What is this situation teaching me about life, about myself, about what truly matters?" Or, "How can I use this experience to become more capable of helping others who face similar challenges?" These questions shift your focus from being a passive victim of circumstances to being an active participant in creating meaning from those circumstances. This doesn't mean pretending to be grateful for traumatic experiences or convincing yourself that everything happens for a reason, in some predetermined cosmic plan. It means recognizing that you have the power to extract value, wisdom, and purpose from even the most difficult experiences. One of the most profound ways to create meaning during crisis is to see your suffering as part of a larger human experience that connects you to others rather than isolates you. Every human being will face loss, disappointment, heartbreak, failure, illness, and eventually death. Your specific circumstances may be unique, but the fundamental experience of struggling with difficulty is universal. This recognition can transform feelings of lonely victimization into feelings of shared humanity. When you understand that your pain is part of the human condition rather than evidence that you're uniquely cursed or inadequate, it becomes easier to approach your struggles with compassion rather than self-pity. Self-pity focuses on how unfair your situation is and how much better others have it. Compassion recognizes that struggle is part of life for everyone, and that your current pain, while real and significant, is also temporary and survivable, because countless others have survived similar experiences. This sense of connection to universal human experience often leads to one of the most meaningful responses to personal crisis: the desire to help others who are facing similar challenges. Many people discover that their own pain becomes more bearable when they use their experience to offer support, understanding, or practical assistance to others in similar situations. This doesn't mean you need to become a professional helper or dedicate your entire life to service. It simply means recognizing that your struggles have given you knowledge and empathy that could be valuable to others. The meaning you create from crisis often involves discovering strengths and capacities you didn't know you possessed. Many people live their entire lives without being truly tested by significant adversity. While no one wishes for crisis, there is something profoundly meaningful about discovering that you're capable of surviving and even thriving through experiences that once would have seemed impossible to endure. This discovery of inner strength is not about becoming proud or boastful about your resilience. It's about developing a quiet confidence in your ability to handle whatever life might bring. This confidence doesn't come from believing that bad things won't happen to you again. It comes from knowing that if difficult things do happen, you have the capacity to find ways through them. Finding meaning in chaos also often involves clarifying your values and priorities in ways that might not have occurred during easier times. When your normal routines and securities are stripped away, you're forced to examine what actually matters most to you. Many people discover during crisis that they were spending enormous amounts of time and energy on things that don't align with their deepest values, while neglecting the relationships, activities, and pursuits that bring real fulfillment. This clarification process can be painful because it often involves acknowledging that you've been living out of alignment with your authentic self. But it's also incredibly valuable because it provides direction for rebuilding your life in ways that are more meaningful and satisfying. Crisis becomes the catalyst for creating a life that is more intentional, more authentic, and more aligned with what truly matters to you. The process of meaning-making during crisis also frequently involves a shift in how you define success and failure. Many people enter crisis with very narrow definitions of success that are based primarily on external achievements, acquisitions, or recognition. But when these external markers of success are threatened or lost, you're forced to develop more internal definitions of what constitutes a meaningful life. Success might become defined as maintaining your integrity during difficult times, or developing deeper relationships with people you care about, or contributing something valuable to your community, or simply becoming a more compassionate and wise human being. These internal definitions of success are much more stable than external ones because they depend on choices you can make regardless of your circumstances. Creating meaning from crisis doesn't require you to believe that everything happens for a reason, or that all suffering serves some higher purpose. It simply requires you to take responsibility for deciding what your experiences will mean to you and how you will allow them to shape your character and your future choices. This is perhaps the ultimate expression of human freedom: the ability to choose your response to whatever circumstances you face. The meaning you create doesn't have to be grand or universally applicable. It can be deeply personal and specific to your own journey. Maybe the meaning of your crisis is learning to ask for help when you need it. Maybe it's discovering that you're stronger than you thought. Maybe it's realizing which relationships truly matter to you. Maybe it's understanding that material security is less important than you previously believed. Maybe it's simply learning to be present with difficult emotions without being overwhelmed by them. Remember that the process of creating meaning from crisis is ongoing. The meaning you make of your experiences today may deepen or evolve as time passes, and you gain more perspective. What initially seems like pure loss may eventually reveal unexpected gifts. What initially feels like random suffering may eventually connect to larger patterns of growth and development in your life. The key is to remain open to the possibility that your current struggles, no matter how painful or senseless they may seem right now, can become part of a meaningful story about who you are and who you are becoming. This openness itself becomes a source of hope and resilience that can sustain you through the darkest periods of any crisis. Chapter 12. The Power of True Surrender. Perhaps no concept is more misunderstood in the context of crisis than surrender. Most people equate surrendering with giving up, becoming passive, or admitting defeat. But true surrender is actually one of the most powerful responses available to you when life falls apart. It's not about becoming helpless or hopeless. It's about stopping the exhausting fight against reality so that you can respond to your situation with wisdom rather than resistance. The confusion about surrender comes from conflating two completely different concepts: surrendering to circumstances and surrendering your agency. Surrendering to circumstances means accepting what has already happened without wasting energy wishing it were different. Surrendering your agency means giving up your power to choose how you respond to what has happened. True surrender involves the first without the second. You accept what is while maintaining complete responsibility for what you do about it. This distinction is crucial because most of the suffering you experience during crisis comes not from the events themselves, but from your resistance to those events. When something unwanted happens, your immediate response is usually some form of mental or emotional fighting. You tell yourself this shouldn't be happening. You rage against the unfairness of it. You exhaust yourself trying to undo what has already been done. All of this resistance accomplishes nothing except to amplify your pain. True surrender means laying down the weapons of resistance without laying down the tools of response. You stop fighting against what has already occurred so that you can focus your energy on what you can actually influence moving forward. This is not passive acceptance. This is strategic wisdom. You're not giving up your power. You're redirecting it toward areas where it can actually make a difference. The practice of surrender often begins with a simple but profound shift in language. Instead of saying, "This shouldn't be happening," you learn to say, "This is what's happening." Instead of saying, "I can't handle this," you learn to say, "I don't know how to handle this yet, but I'm willing to learn." Instead of saying, "This is a disaster," you learn to say, "This is a challenge that I'm going to meet one step at a time." These language shifts might seem superficial, but they reflect fundamental changes in your relationship with difficulty. When you stop arguing with reality, you become available to work with reality. When you stop demanding that your circumstances be different before you can respond effectively, you can begin responding effectively to your actual circumstances. Surrender also involves releasing your attachment to specific outcomes while maintaining your commitment to appropriate action. This is one of the most sophisticated aspects of surrender because it requires holding two seemingly contradictory positions simultaneously. You care deeply about the results of your efforts, so you work diligently toward your goals. But you also recognize that many factors affecting outcomes are outside your control, so you hold your desired results lightly. This balance between caring and detachment allows you to give your best effort to improving your situation without being emotionally devastated if things don't work out exactly as you hoped. You can pursue every reasonable avenue for solving your problems while simultaneously accepting that some problems may not have solutions on your preferred timeline or may require solutions you haven't yet imagined. The power of surrender becomes particularly evident when you're dealing with other people during crisis. You cannot control how others respond to your situation, whether they offer help or support, or what advice or judgment they provide. Trying to control other people's responses creates enormous frustration and wastes energy you need for dealing with your actual problems. Surrendering in relationships during crisis means asking clearly for what you need while accepting that others may or may not be able or willing to provide it. You can communicate your situation honestly without demanding specific responses. You can express appreciation for support that is offered without becoming resentful when support is not available. You can maintain your boundaries and standards without trying to force others to meet your expectations. This approach to surrender in relationships often leads to surprising outcomes. When you stop trying to control how others respond to your crisis, they often become more willing to offer authentic support. When you stop demanding specific forms of help, people sometimes offer assistance in ways you wouldn't have thought to request. When you release others from your expectations, they frequently exceed those expectations voluntarily. Surrender also applies to your relationship with time during crisis. One of the most frustrating aspects of difficult periods is that they often last longer than you want them to last. You want your problems solved quickly. You want your pain to end immediately. You want clarity about your future right now. But healing, problem-solving, and rebuilding often take more time than impatience allows. Surrendering to the natural timing of recovery doesn't mean becoming passive about seeking solutions. It means working diligently on what you can influence, while accepting that some processes simply cannot be rushed. You can take every appropriate action to improve your situation while simultaneously accepting that results may unfold on a different timeline than your preferences would dictate. The practice of surrender often requires letting go of the story you had been telling yourself about how your life was supposed to unfold. Most people enter crisis with specific plans, expectations, and assumptions about their future. When crisis disrupts these plans, part of the suffering comes from grieving the future you thought you were going to have. This grief is natural and necessary. But at some point, surrender involves releasing attachment to the story that is no longer possible so that you can become available to the story that is actually emerging. This doesn't mean you won't work toward many of the same goals you had before. It means you hold those goals more flexibly and remain open to possibilities you hadn't previously considered. True surrender often leads to what many people describe as a profound sense of relief. When you stop fighting against reality, when you stop trying to control outcomes that are beyond your influence, when you release others from your expectations and yourself from impossible demands, an enormous burden is lifted. This relief doesn't solve your external problems, but it frees up the energy you need to address those problems effectively. The deepest level of surrender involves trusting that you have the capacity to handle whatever unfolds, even if you can't see how right now. This is not blind optimism or denial of genuine dangers. This is confidence in your ability to meet challenges as they arise, to learn what you need to learn, to find resources you didn't know were available, and to discover strengths you didn't realize you possessed. This trust doesn't develop overnight, especially if your current crisis has shaken your confidence in your own capabilities. But each time you practice surrendering to what is while maintaining responsibility for your response, you build evidence that you're more resilient and resourceful than you might have believed. This evidence becomes the foundation for the kind of deep trust that allows you to face uncertainty with calmness rather than panic. Chapter 13. Rebuilding your life from the ground up. After you've learned to stay calm during the acute phase of crisis, after you've developed emotional regulation skills and found meaning in your struggles, eventually comes the phase that many people find most challenging: rebuilding. This is the process of creating a new life structure from whatever remains after your previous life has been disrupted. Rebuilding is both an art and a science, requiring both practical skills and deep wisdom about what kind of life you actually want to create. The rebuilding phase often begins before the crisis phase has completely ended. You might still be dealing with ongoing challenges, uncertainty, and emotional ups and downs while simultaneously beginning to make decisions about your future direction. This overlap can feel overwhelming because it requires you to manage current difficulties while also planning for an uncertain future. But understanding this as a natural part of the process helps you approach rebuilding with appropriate patience and realistic expectations. One of the most important principles of rebuilding is starting with a strong foundation rather than trying to quickly recreate the external appearance of success or stability. Many people make the mistake of rushing to replace what they've lost, without taking time to examine whether what they've lost was actually serving their highest good. The job that provided security but drained their energy. The relationship that looked good on the surface but prevented authentic intimacy. The lifestyle that impressed others but left them feeling empty. Crisis often provides an opportunity to rebuild more intentionally than you built the first time. When you're young and just starting out in life, you often make choices based on limited information, external expectations, or assumptions that you later discover don't align with your authentic values and desires. But when you're rebuilding after crisis, you have the advantage of experience, self-knowledge, and clarity about what truly matters to you. The foundation of intentional rebuilding begins with honest self-assessment. What aspects of your previous life were genuinely fulfilling and worth recreating? What aspects were you maintaining out of habit, obligation, or fear rather than genuine choice? What dreams and aspirations did you abandon or postpone that might now be worth pursuing? What values and priorities have been clarified or shifted through your crisis experience? This self-assessment process requires courage because it often reveals that you were living in ways that weren't fully authentic or satisfying. It's tempting to blame your previous choices on external circumstances or other people's expectations. But taking full responsibility for your choices, both past and future, is essential for creating a life that truly reflects who you are and what you want. The rebuilding process also requires developing what could be called strategic patience. This means working diligently toward your goals while accepting that meaningful reconstruction takes time. Just as physical healing cannot be rushed without risking re-injury, psychological and life rebuilding cannot be forced without risking creating new problems or repeating old patterns. Strategic patience involves breaking down large rebuilding goals into smaller, manageable steps that you can work on consistently over time. Instead of trying to solve all your problems at once or recreate your entire life immediately, you focus on making steady progress in key areas while allowing your overall vision to evolve as you learn and grow. Financial rebuilding often requires particular attention during this phase, especially if your crisis involved job loss, business failure, divorce, or other financially disruptive events. The temptation is often to focus exclusively on replacing lost income as quickly as possible, but this narrow focus can lead to making choices that solve short-term financial pressure while creating long-term dissatisfaction. A more strategic approach to financial rebuilding involves balancing immediate survival needs with longer-term goals for creating work that is both financially sustainable and personally meaningful. This might mean taking a temporary job to meet basic expenses while simultaneously developing skills or pursuing opportunities that align more closely with your authentic interests and values. Relationship rebuilding is another crucial aspect of this phase. Crisis often reveals which relationships are truly supportive and which relationships are based on superficial factors like convenience, habit, or mutual dependency, rather than genuine care and compatibility. Some relationships may have been damaged during your crisis, either because of stress and difficult behavior, or because others couldn't understand or support what you were going through. Rebuilding relationships requires both forgiveness and discernment. Forgiveness for others who disappointed you during your difficult time, and also forgiveness for yourself if you weren't at your best in some of your interactions. But forgiveness doesn't mean automatically returning all relationships to their previous status. Some relationships may need new boundaries. Some may need to be rebuilt on different foundations. Some may need to be released entirely to make space for healthier connections. The rebuilding phase is also an opportunity to develop new relationships with people who understand and appreciate who you're becoming rather than who you used to be. This might mean joining groups or communities related to your new interests or values, seeking mentors who have navigated similar transitions, or simply being more intentional about the kind of people you want to spend time with. Physical and health rebuilding often requires attention as well. Crisis and stress take tolls on physical health, and the rebuilding phase is an ideal time to establish healthier habits and practices. This doesn't require dramatic lifestyle changes or expensive interventions. Often, simple consistencies around sleep, nutrition, exercise, and stress management create foundations for improved energy, mood, and resilience. The emotional and psychological aspects of rebuilding involve integrating the lessons and growth that have emerged from your crisis experience. This means allowing the wisdom you've gained to influence your future choices rather than simply trying to return to your previous way of operating. You're not the same person who entered the crisis, and your rebuilt life should reflect the growth and changes that have occurred. This integration process often involves developing new personal practices and routines that support your ongoing well-being and growth. Maybe it's regular time for reflection or meditation. Maybe it's creative pursuits that were neglected in your previous life. Maybe it's commitments to learning, service, or adventure that honor the expanded sense of what's possible that often emerges from surviving crisis. Remember that rebuilding is not about creating a perfect life that will never face challenges again. It's about creating a life that is more aligned with your authentic self, more resilient in the face of future difficulties, and more satisfying in terms of meaning and fulfillment. The life you rebuild after crisis often becomes more beautiful and fulfilling than the life that was disrupted. Not because crisis is good, but because the rebuilding process allows you to apply wisdom and intention that wasn't available the first time around. Chapter 14. Wisdom gained through fire. There are certain kinds of wisdom that can only be gained through direct experience with difficulty, uncertainty, and loss. This wisdom is different from intellectual understanding or second-hand knowledge because it's been forged in the fire of actual challenge. It's wisdom that changes not just what you know, but who you are at the deepest level. This is the hidden gift that emerges from learning to stay calm when life falls apart. You become someone who possesses hard-won wisdom about the nature of life, resilience, and human strength. One of the first pieces of wisdom that emerges from navigating crisis successfully is a deep understanding of your own resilience. Before facing significant challenges, most people have only theoretical knowledge of their own capacity to handle difficulty. They might believe they're strong or weak, but they don't really know until they're tested. When you've actually survived something you weren't sure you could survive. When you've found ways forward when the path wasn't clear. When you've discovered inner resources you didn't know existed. You develop unshakable confidence in your ability to handle whatever life might bring. This confidence is not arrogance or invulnerability. It's a quiet knowing that you've been tested and found to be more capable than you previously believed. It's the understanding that while you cannot prevent all future difficulties, you have what it takes to meet them with wisdom and courage. This inner knowing changes how you approach all of life's challenges, both large and small, because you're no longer operating from fear of your own inadequacy. Another profound wisdom that emerges from crisis is a clearer understanding of what actually matters in life versus what you thought mattered before you were tested. Many people spend years pursuing goals, accumulating possessions, seeking recognition, or maintaining relationships that provide little real satisfaction or meaning. But crisis has a way of stripping away everything that isn't essential, revealing what truly deserves your time, energy, and attention. This clarity about priorities is not just intellectual, it's felt in your bones. When you face the possibility of losing everything, you understand viscerally the difference between what's truly important and what's merely important to your ego or your image. This understanding guides your future choices in ways that tend to create more authentic satisfaction and fulfillment. The wisdom gained through crisis also includes a deeper understanding of the temporary nature of all circumstances, both positive and negative. When you've lived through the experience of having your entire world turned upside down, you understand that no external situation is permanent. This understanding brings both humility during good times and hope during difficult times. You can enjoy success and prosperity without clinging to them desperately, because you know they will change. You can endure hardship and loss without despair, because you know they are not permanent states. This perspective on impermanence leads to what many wisdom traditions call equanimity, the ability to remain balanced and centered, regardless of whether circumstances are favorable or challenging. This doesn't mean becoming indifferent or emotionally flat. It means maintaining your inner equilibrium while fully experiencing whatever life brings, knowing that all conditions are temporary and that your essential self exists beyond any particular set of circumstances. Crisis also teaches profound lessons about the nature of control and acceptance. Before facing significant challenges, most people live with the illusion that they have much more control over their circumstances than they actually do. Crisis reveals the limits of personal control in ways that can initially be terrifying but ultimately become liberating. When you truly understand what you can and cannot control, you stop wasting energy on futile attempts to control the uncontrollable and focus your efforts where they can actually make a difference. This wisdom about control leads to a more skillful relationship with effort and outcome. You learn to give your best effort to improving your situation while holding the results lightly. You can work diligently toward your goals without being emotionally devastated if things don't unfold exactly as you hoped. This balance between caring deeply and detaching from outcomes allows you to navigate life with both passion and peace. The experience of receiving help during crisis often provides wisdom about interdependence and community that transforms how you relate to others. Many people pride themselves on independence and self-reliance, but crisis reveals that these qualities, while valuable, are incomplete. Everyone needs help sometimes. Everyone benefits from community and support. Recognizing and accepting this reality doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. This understanding often leads to greater generosity and compassion toward others who are struggling. When you've been in need yourself, when you've experienced the vulnerability of not having everything under control, you naturally become more understanding of others' difficulties and more willing to offer support when you're able. The empathy gained through personal struggle becomes a gift you can offer to others facing similar challenges. Crisis wisdom also includes a deeper appreciation for simple pleasures and everyday experiences that might have been taken for granted before. When you face the possibility of losing what matters most to you, ordinary moments become extraordinary. The taste of food when you're truly hungry, the feeling of safety when you've experienced real danger, the comfort of a friend's presence when you've felt alone, the simple fact of being alive when you've confronted mortality. This enhanced appreciation for ordinary life is not sentimentality or forced gratitude. It's a natural result of understanding how precious and fragile the basic conditions of well-being actually are. This appreciation becomes a reliable source of joy and contentment that doesn't depend on extraordinary circumstances or achievements. Perhaps the deepest wisdom that emerges from crisis is an understanding of your own fundamental okayness, regardless of external circumstances. When you've been stripped of many of the external factors you thought defined your worth and identity, when you've faced your own limitations and failures directly, When you've survived the experience of everything falling apart, you often discover that your essential self remains intact and valuable despite all losses and changes. This recognition of your intrinsic worth, independent of achievements, possessions, relationships, or circumstances, provides a foundation of self-respect and inner peace that cannot be shaken by future challenges. You no longer need to prove your value through external accomplishments or protect your worth by avoiding difficulty. You know that you are fundamentally okay. And this knowing becomes an unshakable source of confidence and calm. The wisdom gained through crisis also includes practical knowledge about how to navigate difficulty more skillfully in the future. You've learned which coping strategies actually help and which ones create additional problems. You've discovered which relationships provide genuine support and which ones become additional sources of stress during challenging times. You've identified your early warning signs of emotional overwhelm and developed techniques for addressing stress before it becomes unmanageable. This practical wisdom makes you more resilient, not because you won't face future challenges, but because you'll face them with better tools, clearer perspectives, and greater confidence in your ability to find ways forward. Each crisis you navigate successfully adds to your arsenal of practical knowledge and emotional skills, making you increasingly capable of helping not only yourself, but others who face similar difficulties. Chapter 15. Becoming unshakable. After traveling through the depths of crisis and emerging with newfound wisdom and strength, you arrive at a state that can best be described as being unshakable. This is not a state of rigid invulnerability or emotional numbness. It's a flexible strength that allows you to remain centered and responsive regardless of what life brings. Being unshakable means you've developed the capacity to face uncertainty, loss, and challenge without being fundamentally destabilized by them. The unshakable person is not someone who never faces difficulties or never experiences intense emotions. They are someone who has learned to maintain their inner equilibrium while fully experiencing whatever arises. They can feel fear without being paralyzed by it. They can experience sadness without being consumed by it. They can face uncertainty without being overwhelmed by anxiety. Their emotional responses are natural and appropriate, but they don't define or control their essential state of being. This unshakable quality emerges naturally from having successfully navigated crisis with wisdom and grace. It's not something you achieve through trying to be unshakable. It's something that develops organically when you've repeatedly discovered that you can handle whatever life brings, that you can find meaning and growth even in difficult experiences, and that your essential self remains intact regardless of external circumstances. Being unshakable also means you've developed what could be called response ability, the ability to choose your response to any situation rather than simply reacting automatically based on conditioning, emotion, or circumstance. This doesn't mean your responses are cold or calculated. It means they arise from a centered place of wisdom rather than a reactive place of fear or defensiveness. This responsibility is perhaps the greatest freedom available to human beings. External circumstances will always be largely outside your control. Other people will make their own choices according to their own understanding and capacity. Events will unfold according to complex factors that you cannot predict or influence. But your response to all of these factors remains within your domain of choice. And the quality of your life is largely determined by the quality of your responses. The unshakable person has learned to locate their security internally rather than externally. Their sense of well-being and stability comes from their relationship with themselves, their values, their inner resources, and their connection to whatever they consider sacred or meaningful, rather than from their external circumstances being exactly as they prefer them to be. This internal security doesn't develop through positive thinking or denial of life's genuine challenges. It develops through repeatedly discovering that you can maintain your essential well-being even when external conditions are difficult, uncertain, or unfavorable. Each time you navigate challenge successfully, while maintaining your integrity and inner peace, you build evidence that your security comes from within, rather than from having everything in your external world arranged perfectly. The unshakable quality also includes a deep acceptance of life's fundamental uncertainty. Most people spend enormous amounts of energy trying to create certainty and predictability in their lives, and they suffer when these efforts inevitably fall short. But the unshakable person has made peace with uncertainty as a basic characteristic of existence. They can make plans and work toward goals while remaining flexible when circumstances require adaptation. This acceptance of uncertainty doesn't make them passive or fatalistic. If anything, it makes them more effective because they're not wasting energy fighting against the basic conditions of life. They can respond creatively and strategically to changing circumstances because they're not frozen by the need for everything to be predictable and controllable. Being unshakable also involves having developed a long-term perspective that helps you maintain equanimity during both challenging and favorable periods. When you understand that all circumstances are temporary and that your life includes cycles of difficulty and ease, success and failure, connection and solitude, you can navigate each phase without losing perspective about the larger journey. This long-term view helps you avoid being too elated by temporary successes or too devastated by temporary setbacks. You can fully experience and appreciate positive developments in your life while holding them lightly, knowing they will eventually change form. You can fully acknowledge and address difficulties without losing hope, knowing that they too will pass and often lead to unexpected opportunities for growth. The unshakable person has also developed what might be called emotional sovereignty. This means their emotional state is not completely dependent on external validation, other people's behavior, or circumstances being exactly as they prefer. They can maintain their inner peace and well-being even when others are upset with them, even when they're facing criticism or rejection, even when their environment is chaotic or stressful. This emotional sovereignty doesn't mean becoming isolated or uncaring about others' feelings. It means not making your own emotional stability completely dependent on managing other people's emotions or reactions. You can care deeply about others while maintaining your own center. You can be empathetic and responsive to others' needs, while not losing yourself in their problems or making their problems your identity. The development of unshakable presence also includes having learned to trust your own inner guidance and wisdom. Through navigating crisis successfully, you've discovered that you have access to insights, intuition, and wisdom that can guide you through uncertainty even when you don't have all the information you might prefer to have. This trust in your inner guidance allows you to move forward confidently, even when the path isn't completely clear. This trust doesn't mean believing you'll never make mistakes or that your first instinct is always correct. It means having confidence in your ability to learn from experience, to course correct when necessary, and to find your way through complexity and uncertainty by paying attention to your deepest knowing about what feels right and true for you. Perhaps most importantly, being unshakable includes having developed genuine compassion for yourself and others. This compassion arises naturally from understanding that everyone is doing their best with their current level of consciousness and capacity, that everyone faces challenges and struggles, and that everyone deserves kindness and understanding, especially during difficult times. This compassion makes you unshakable not through hardness or detachment, but through an open-hearted strength that can remain present with suffering without being destroyed by it. You can witness others' pain without taking it on as your own. You can offer support and assistance without losing your own balance. You can acknowledge your own mistakes and limitations without harsh self-judgment. The unshakable presence you develop through learning to stay calm when life falls apart becomes a gift not only to yourself, but to everyone around you. In a world where many people are reactive, anxious, and driven by external circumstances, Your centered presence provides a stabilizing influence that helps others access their own calm and wisdom. You become a reminder that it's possible to face life's challenges with grace, dignity, and inner peace. This is the ultimate reward for learning to navigate crisis with wisdom and courage. You don't just survive difficult times, you become someone who can help others survive them as well. You don't just develop personal resilience, you become a source of strength and stability for your community. You discover that the very experiences that once threatened to destroy you have instead forged you into someone capable of extraordinary calm, wisdom, and strength. The journey from being overwhelmed by crisis to becoming unshakable is one of the most profound transformations available to human beings. It's a journey that no one chooses voluntarily, but one that offers gifts that cannot be obtained any other way. When life falls apart and you learn to remain calm in the center of the storm, you discover not just how to survive difficulty, but how to transform difficulty into wisdom, strength, and unshakable peace.